God bless you, my brothers and sisters. I greet you here in my study between the two services here at Progressive Baptist Church this Sunday morning. What a joyful time we had this morning, as the Lord always shows up at Progressive Baptist Church. Today's sermon was called Won't He Do It? We looked at 2 Kings chapter 7 verses 1 through 11, realizing you need to read chapter 6 and 7 to make it make sense. As we looked at that text, we discovered three things. Ultimately, we discovered you got to be careful about doubting what God says. But what we discovered was that Samaria was under siege by the Syrians. The siege is a protracted sense of battle whereby you don't fight directly. You surround a fortified city that you don't believe you can beat with direct combat, and you starve them out. You cut off their supply lines. You keep them from being able to succeed by cutting them off from their resources. In the process, what we discovered is this, that God sometimes wants his people to learn lessons from their enemies. The enemy almost broke God's people down with a siege, realizing they couldn't win face to face, so they cut off their supply lines. And you know what? Sometimes we've got to learn how to fight like they fight. And if we learn lessons from our enemies, even though our weapons are different, the strategy can be the same. While we don't have to cut off the enemy's supply lines, if we use prayer and faith, I promise you, a believer praying in faith who will stick with it and not give up can bring the enemy, the devil, to his knees. The devil can't stand a praying warrior and a praying Christian. That's the first lesson we learned. The second lesson we learned was you got to be careful about foolish friends. You can learn some lessons from them too. In chapter 7, verse 1, the assistant to the king said, when Elijah prophesied, by this time tomorrow your situation will be resolved. He said, man, even if God opens the windows of heaven, that's not possible. You got to be careful doubting what God says God will do, because that man did not get to taste any of the change. He got to see it, but he didn't get to enjoy it. And that's the tragedy of having foolish friends who don't believe that God will do what God says. And here's what we finally learned. While you learn lessons from your enemies and while you learn lessons from foolish friends, ultimately, if you want to see God do it, you got to learn how to listen to the Lord in spite of them. And those of us who listen to the Lord, who put our hope and trust in Jesus Christ, have a different testimony. While the friend who was foolish said, if God opens the windows of heaven, can it happen? The others of us said, won't he do it? And we always answer that question, yes, he will. Because the God we serve always makes a way for his children. Now, this is the short version. I'll give you more at the end of the second service. I really want you to come and hear the sermon in its entirety. There are details that are too much for me to give in this short video, but I promise you this. If God says it, you can certainly count on it. He'll do just what he said. I love you with the pastor's heart. See you at 10. Peace.